I'll admit people as they start, but really thrilled. We've been doing this now for 2 years, the Big Texas Read, since the pandemic started. My name is Blake Kimsey. I'm the Executive Director of Writing Workshops Dallas. And David Samuel Levinson, a little while ago, well, 2 years, he said, hey, let's partner up with Gemini Inc. down in San Antonio and try and do a Big Texas Read to kind of feature Texas authors, have them moderated. It's just been really, really wonderful. You know, we have been supported by our independent bookstores, both in San Antonio, the Twig Bookshop, and in Terabang Books. And we always like to mention Lone Star Literary. They post about this every month. They're really great about spreading the word. And even when we post this, the recording of this, they're great about sharing that as well. So it's been really great. We also love Humanities Texas, who's given us a grant so that we can you know, keep this going and have great guests on. And also the University of Texas San Antonio Library System. They're really great about also spreading the word for the Big Texas Read. So we're very thankful to them. I love that I've gotten to know so many new authors through this. I'm so glad I've gotten to know Alexandra Vandekamp down at Gemini Inc., who I'm going to let say a few things about their programming and their literary arts center down in San Antonio.
Thanks, Blake. Yeah, just briefly, I'm Alexandra Vandekamp, as Blake just said, the Executive Director of Gemini Inc., and we are San Antonio's Writing Arts Center. And we just love doing programs like tonight, where we're helping readers and writers come together. And believe it or not, we've done the Big Texas Read. April's going to be our 2-year anniversary, which is kind of amazing. And, you know, I think one thing I've been really just wonderfully surprised by, well, not surprised, it's just fed me poetically and literarily, is just the wealth of writers we have in Texas and the diverse voices and just the amazing things they're all doing. So if we can do a little bit of showing a bigger light and shining a brighter star on just the great literary work happening in this state, you know, that makes our day, so to speak. So I'm very psyched to have Mike Soto here, who I think has one of the most amazing titles to a book of poems I've ever read. And the wonderful Sebastián Páramo as moderator. So everyone just use the chat, spread the love, you know, share comments. There'll be an audience Q&A at the end. And we're just very glad you're here and joining us. And I'm going to hand it back to Blake.
Yes. Okay. So I get to introduce Mike and Sebastián. And Mike Soto, he's up in New York now. He is the author of the chapbooks Beyond the Shadows, Inc. and Dallas Spleen. His debut collection of poetry, A Grave is Given Supper, was adapted for the stage in a unique collaboration of literary theater with Teatro Dallas, with recent performances in New Ohio Theater's Ice Factory in New York in July of 2021. Isles of Firm Ground, his translation of Ignacio Ruiz Perez's poetry, will be published by Deep Vellum in June of 2022. He is currently working on his second book of poetry, a collection with photographer Diego Enrique Flores. And tonight, Mike will be in conversation with Sebastián H. Páramo, who is a Canto Mundo Fellow and a former Dobie Paciano Fellow. His work has appeared in or is forthcoming in Split Lip, Protean Magazine, New England Review, Southeast Review, Bennington Review, and elsewhere. He is the founding editor of The Boiler and poetry editor for Deep Vellum. He is a visiting assistant professor of English at Austin College in Sherman, Texas, and we are so thrilled to have you both on the program tonight. Thank you both for being here, Mike and Sebastián, and we're looking forward to your conversation this evening.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I guess I'll sort of start by just going over the format. So we're actually going to maybe do things a little bit differently. So Mike is going to read a few poems, talk about the book a little bit, because there's just some context that may be needed to understand the book. But after the first couple of poems, we'll pause for questions. So that way, you know, we can sort of sit with the poems a little bit more and, you know, maybe more immediately jump in with questions, because I know it can be hard to hang on to the questions until the very end. At least that's what Mike and I were talking about earlier. So, so definitely be thinking about questions or ways that you can engage with the work. But I'll let Mike start us off.
Yeah, first of all, thank you everyone for coming, and appreciate writing workshops Dallas having me, Alex and David. So I'm going to be reading from the, our book that we're discussing, A Grave is Given Supper. So this is my debut collection. And so just a few words on the book. So I'll just describe it a little bit for those who haven't read it, or just to sort of start the conversation. As some of you might know, like I sort of wrote this as putting the context of the drug war that's, ongoing along the US-Mexico border, and sort of setting it in a narrative of an acid Western narrative, and sort of taking the acid Western film and sort of taking that framework and creating my own narrative to sort of, I would say, dramatize or bring out sort of what's going on along the border and sort of in the heartland of Mexico. So, this book is sort of written in the tradition of an acid Western, where it's sort of subverting the traditional Western film genre of, say, Manifest Destiny, the sort of traditional hero against a savage native, sort of this life-affirming east to west journey. Like the acid Westerns are much darker. They're more of a journey from life to death many times. And in this case, my book is sort of a journey from the south to the north, following sort of also, sort of the urge to, or sort of an immigrant narrative. So the two characters that are in the book are sort of taken from Alejandro Jodorowsky's El Topo, which, if you know anything about the probably most exemplary acid Westerns are El Topo and probably Jim Jarmusch's Dead Man. So I wrote A Grave is Given Supper sort of in lineage with El Topo. And the two characters in the book are sort of Topos in the making, I would consider. And they're sort of, like seeking a better life, living in a fictional border town, which I called El Sumidero, which is, fictional, but based on Juarez and also Tijuana. So their journey is, to, like survival, a journey for a better life, but also the survival of their spiritual selves, which is something I think that I really wanted to do with this book, is sort of bring out that journey, the sort of immaterial journey of why people like sort of risk their lives to like cross the border. So I'll read a pair of poems and then we can just like talk about them. So this first poem is called The Wall, commonly known as the Brow of God, and it's sort of about, just how the different variations of the wall that have sort of evolved over the years. But of course, it's sort of fictional, but it's based on the actual wall that exists along, the United States and Mexico, between Mexico and New Mexico, California, Los Angeles, and Arizona. So this is called The Wall, commonly known as the Brow of God. In Sumidero, the wall is always looming. Night and day are North Star, blunt reminder of the difference between this life and the one in the Norte. By far the reason why the ground is gutted with tunnels. Decades of desperate maneuvers, so many names trapped in trying. If not a tunnel that connects a pink corner store basement to the bathroom of a Texaco, where a razor and a change of clothes wait, then a tunnel that connects a restaurant table always reserved to the empty pool of a house in Calexico. If not the tunnel that takes you to a Malverde shrine in Agua Prieta, said to be teeming with luck, then a tunnel that runs through a copper mine to a greenhouse in Las Cruces. The above ground alternatives. Snake yourself into the engine block of a truck. Agree to have your body stacked under cargo. Endure the heat rising exponentially in a trailer inching towards the border, with the sea of other vehicles all in the same limbo. Covering desert, valley, and mountains. The wall is an endless mind of steel east of Nogales, pre-slabs in the worst parts of Sumidero, where many use the barrier as the fourth wall of their homes. Some sections of the wall are rigged with ground sensors and tracked by drones, and some are an open invitation to walk a cemetery of scorched sand. But the section stitched into the minds of everyone that lives here is a section of the wall that most have never seen, miles away where they say the wall goes into the ocean and the constant fog serves to hide that it ends or to maintain the awe of it going all the way across. So that sort of gives you a sense of what I was trying to do with the wall. I really wanted the wall in this book to sort of be, I think, a character in and of itself. I wanted to sort of to be omnipresent, something that's just like narrating the lives of the characters. And I don't know, I always am surprised when reading from this book so far, like how many people don't know that the wall actually goes into the ocean. The border wall between San Diego and Tijuana goes into the ocean, and like people like surf there. There's like a beach, there's a park, ironically called Friendship Park there. And I sort of took a liberty of sort of thinking that, stretching my imagination of just thinking like the wall going into the ocean, like, thinking like, I don't know, just like the evolution and, like what recent presidents have tried to do in terms of like extending the wall, evolving the wall. It's almost like this living techno entity. So anyway, that's the first poem I read. So the second poem I read sort of sets up the main protagonist of the book. So, in Spanish, we like to use the diminutive sort of affectionately. So again, writing in lineage with El Topo, I took the liberty to call the protagonist of this book, Topito, sort of the diminutive of El Topo. And this is sort of his story that sort of sets up his journey at the beginning of the book. Topito. In the scorched sands outside of Sumidero, I buried my first toy and a picture of my mother, said goodbye to my father, who left determined to get across the wall commonly known as the brow of God. After that, the horizon I gazed at for a grip on what to do now, next, for the rest of my life gave me nothing. All I could do was sit, duck my head into the darkness of my held knees for what seemed like hours, enough to fall half asleep and dream a section of the wall shadow came over and clocked a hat into place on my head. I woke and looked up, but the monolith was gone. I stood and scanned the horizon, spotted a horse and a rider. That's when I knew the dream was real. As fast as I could, I ran in their direction. The rider, a man in a snakeskin vest, slowed down and told me, Topito, your hat is all black, so the brim and the shadow it casts will always be confused. Now a way to go unseen is yours and the inward journey possible. Now you start seeing how the flesh gets tamed. And in those of you who have seen El Topo, that is sort of like, that scene should be familiar because I think that was directly inspired by the opening scene in El Topo, where we see this sort of, where we see El Topo sort of taking his son into the desert, sort of purposefully to like shed his innocence as a boy. And I don't know, I think like, I got sort of like, I've referred to sort of a section of the wall as a monolith in this poem. And I think I was, while researching this book, I think I was looking at sort of the prototypes that were sort of being erected during Trump's time as president. I think they were like put up like 3 models, almost like they were shopping them one next after the other. And there was just like one section. I mean, the section of the wall that was built during the Bush years and into the Trump years is sort of like this modern, aesthetically pleasing wall that can be tracked, that must, has to have maintenance. And I sort of like just saw a section of it and thought like, oh, that kind of, I could sort of like transform that into like this monolith that kind of casts this shadow on the main character in sort of this dream state. So anyway, I'll sort of like pause there, and I don't know if Sebastian, you want to say anything, or we can.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's already a really great sort of segue into the world of the book, and one of the questions I wanted to ask was about, you know, how the book came together, or like how you, or especially since you introduced Topito in one of these poems that you just read. I was wondering maybe more specifically if you could talk about maybe the characters and the world building that you did throughout the book, how you put that in conversation with El Topo, the actual movie, and also these other things that you wanted to talk about, you know, or I guess ultimately, how did you navigate the mythology of these figures and their struggles?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, I think I was sort of struggling. I wouldn't say struggling. I was just sort of like, for the first, maybe I would say 4 years writing this book, because I think it took me the better part of like maybe 7 or 8. And I think I wanted to write about the drug war just because, you know, like my family's from Mexico, and they're from a region where, you know, the drug wars really affected everything, you know, and I've sort of like all my life I've been going back and forth. So I think I was sort of just writing about, you know, the drug war and how senseless it is sort of became circa 2006. And then I came across Alejandro Jodorowsky's El Topo. I'd seen it before only once, but you know, like you see it again, something just sort of like clicked. And I thought like the way the film sort of creates metaphor, how it sort of like really disembodies images and puts them together, and disembodies like symbolism and, you know, themes of mysticism, and also like the way it depicts like violence, and it's sort of like disturbing. I felt like it's sort of surreal and visceral at the same time, and I felt like that's exactly what we were seeing in terms of like the violence that was going on. And I think like that sort of gave me permission to, I think, to like, you know, call like the nameless protagonist that was in the book Topito. And for some reason, mysteriously, I always had this character called Consuelo in the poems. And yeah, I sort of just started, you know, creating that narrative and applying it to what I was already writing. And I think after that, like the book sort of came together like really fast. And yeah, and I think like, but a lot of it is also like based on my tangential experience, my real experience of being in Mexico. I'm obviously not directly involved in any of the things that are going on, but you know, like I think anybody who has roots in Mexico has sort of been affected. You know, like they're, you know, like I think how much I saw family or could feel free to visit my mom's home state, where it's a place where I still consider like home, just really became affected. You know, I felt the terror, you know, and I felt the need to address it. And from that, you know, like I think I'm not from Juarez. I don't know Juarez as well as I do, say, Laredo or Nuevo Laredo. But I could, you know, like sort of approximate, you know, what it's sort of like, what a border town is, because I feel like I know that. And I also feel like that because, you know, like my experience wasn't direct, I also felt it was also important to like fictionalize it, to sort of be like, to not claim fact, but also like take liberties with like the more symbolic or metaphorical aspects of the book that I was writing. Should I go on and like read a couple more and then we can continue?
Yeah, let's go ahead and read some more. And actually, could I make a request maybe?
Sure.
In addition to the ones that you were planning to read, maybe could you read Fog Having Tea with a Graveyard?
Sure. Should I read that now? I'll just read it now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Fog having tea with a graveyard. We caught the tombstone sleeping, or so we thought. The deeper we walked, we knew the sky had dropped down to ankles and the cemetery had company locked in. Time woven out, minutes into moments, seconds into the sheer white cloth of a cloud we now feared to part. The tombs no longer a shortcut to the other side of town, where water was our mirror for skipping stones. Even the dismembered statues that became our trophies, Mary whose hand was swallowed by her heart, Our Lady of the Nose bitten off for spilling blossoms from her robe, seemed to conspire with a lust that could exist above the moss for this morning only. And when you dared me, steal the pieces that lay broken at the feet of the headless angel with the sword, that only gave Godspeed to the mischief already sparked in my mind. But leaving made that weight come alive on my back, dragging me down, making me stagger to the space where the walls crowned with broken bottle shards paused, and stepped on the same grave as always to climb out, but this time barely, with what was starting to weigh as much as a man on my shoulders. Yeah, and that one's kind of interesting. I don't know, I'm like pretty heavily influenced by Frank Stanford. And I feel like that title is a direct Frank Stanford, I don't know, metaphor. So I think let's see. So how about I'm gonna read a couple of Consuelo poems just to give us a sense of Consuelo. So Consuelo is so there's Topito and Consuelo, and like I said, Consuelo was in these poems. She's like I don't know how, somehow I just created this character and it sort of carried like the early poems forth. And I don't know, like I think I sort of was writing this female protagonist, and she sort of carried the book for like a long time. And I think one of the things that is sort of interesting is in the book is that, you know, like it's Topito and Consuelo eventually meet. And this first poem is sort of about the first time she sort of loses her own innocence. So it's sort of like a counterpart to Topito as well. And it sort of starts on this like mistake. That's sort of what I write it as. So this is called Blank Chapel or Consuelo's Mistake. And it's sort of like a mini biography of Consuelo. The empty doorway cried escape to her by name. So she took the invitation to step in, unwrap the rain from her face, and wait for the storm to pay its sudden visit. But seeing the vandalized walls, a message started, then smeared, the mad steering of a hand through paint. To Consuelo, the ruined whitewash was blindness smeared into sight, a rage she shouldn't have recognized, the one house of God she shouldn't have rushed into. Floors recently laid down, walls primed just the day before, with the bust of Malverde set to arrive with the front door that afternoon. Nothing to stop her from getting closer, tasting first with her finger the glimmer and the grit. Nobody to keep her from gliding her tongue across the wall, deciding salt from the moon, what rushed leaves and laughter up the ladder of her spine. And no one with her in the silence after someone cleared their throat, when at once she knew the mud her bare feet dragged, the shawl she let fall on the floor, that she would be pulled out by much more than her hair, turning to find the faces like a firing squad armed with blanks, with blame, with stares. And that's sort of like that's actually like the first poem in the book, and then the sort of rest of the narrative unfolds. And I sort of like, I don't know, I've always liked the idea of mistakes and mistake making as the beginning of something. I think a common sort of like I would say of meditation that I had, like writing these poems, was whenever I felt like, you know, something wasn't working or they were sort of like going nowhere, I always told myself like, well, you haven't made the right mistake yet. You haven't found a way to like break the conventional syntax, you know, to sort of like get away from the conventional meaning of words, to sort of like go off into like something you know, like more exciting. So that was sort of like cool for me to sort of like think like Consuelo's making a mistake by sort of stepping into this chapel. And we also have like the first mention of the folk saint Malverde, because this chapel is supposed to be like blank, but it's going to be dedicated to the folk saint Malverde, who is now known as the patron saint of drug dealers, but you know, really has like a long history in Mexico. So I mean, I think like that's what is interesting me a lot too, like folk religion, particularly the cult of Jesus Malverde, because I just think it's really interesting. You know, like the story behind that is sort of like based on a real person who sort of robbed from the greedy to give to the needy in a time like the early 1900s in Mexico, when, you know, like that was essentially like the poverty rate in Mexico was like just decimating sort of indigenous villages, and these people were sort of like doing what they could to survive. And out of that came Malverde, who was hanged for doing that, and he sort of became the symbol of the people, and it sort of like got carried on. And you know, I guess sort of logically, like the people who, you know, had no means sort of better themselves, but to like get involved in the drug trade, appropriated him. But he's really like a folk saint of sort of like people who don't have anywhere else to go, conventional religion, you know, the government is not going to fill their needs. So it's sort of like, what am I trying to say? Sort of like, it could be the cult around the folk saint could be mostly made up, but I think the fact that people have put so much faith in this, you know, it sort of gives it the power of reality. You know, it's not an ordained saint by the Catholic Church. It's sort of elected by the people and their particular need that's never been met by the church or state. So I think, so I'll just read the sort of companion poem to that. So this poem sort of bookends the poem I just read. So in Blank Chapel or Consuelo's Mistake, we sort of get introduced Consuelo. She puts herself in this, accidentally in this situation, and she sort of endures this trauma by these people who seek to punish her for vandalizing this empty chapel, which, you know, she didn't do. She sort of got caught there, and consequently, the main character, Topito, in the book is the one who vandalized the church, and she ends up getting punished for it. So in this poem, sort of like if you trace the narrative at this point in the book with this poem, she's grown up, she's gone through a long struggle. Her and Topito have met, and they've sort of had this impossible love affair, and now she has sort of a chance to redeem herself, Topito, and sort of like, you know, the relationship that they had. So this is called the Malverde Chapel or Consuelo's Revenge. Gratitude inscribed in gold, carefully thought out dedications on plaques for cargo passed safely across the border, black hats stuffed with dollars, copies of recently obtained deeds and passports. Some arrive in monster trucks, others in vintage cars with airbrush murals on their hoods paying homage. Those who believe more and more people seek Malverde's help for distorted reasons say nothing. Don't say anything about the vendors selling chains, Malverde wallets, the rows of plastic busts. Consuelo skirts through the crowd, moves in like a cloud over the day to darken it. She recognizes the faces, the man with a flat top in a black leather jacket, the one with the face of an iguana. The other wearing mirrored sunglasses had a diamond grill that read Chango when he smiled at her. Consuelo gets close to the man with the flat top. For a moment, he stares right at her, but he can't place who she is. Consuelo holds her hand out, shows him a prickly pear split down the middle, its ultraviolet redness irresistible. He can't help but reach for it and shock his hand with spines. By the time he looks up, his eyes are yellow. The room is lit with faces trying not to look. And Consuelo is in the street thinking how much better the chapel looked hollowed out, the bright hum of its emptiness, the ecstasy of landing in front of those walls, pushed by a storm into that space Topito had smeared, the delirium. And I guess I'll just say with that poem, I feel like, I don't know, I sort of had this idea, you know, like the appropriation of Malverde. I think like a lot of, he sort of became known as this saint with drug leaders, I think really through the media in Mexico, who sort of twisted it that way. And I don't know, I sort of felt like this is sort of a reclamation, you know, like, and I don't know, I kind of had fun thinking that, you know, like, that Malverde could be sort of appropriated for creative purposes. I mean, I guess, which I did, you know, like, I think part of the practice of writing this book is sort of like, you know, like maintaining an altar. So I maintained like an altar to Malverde and sort of came back to it as sort of helped me center the book and what it was about, like my intentions with it, collected objects and sort of evolved the altar. And to this day, I just still have one. And I think, yeah, I don't know. I think that practice was really, I don't know, it was really formative. And I think like, I really couldn't have written the book any other way without like sort of having that practice of maintaining an altar, creating one, maintaining it, evolving it.
Yeah, I'll jump in and this one I also mentioned. This is Malverde, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and you were also talking about the objects. I've seen the altar at your apartment, but like there are these objects, and like in the poems that you read just now, there's all these objects that sort of seem to function as, I don't know, sort of idols or false idols or something in a way. I don't know if that's intentional, but just thinking about Consuelo, this character that you have throughout the book, I mean, and the things that she faces, I mean, the things that you're describing in reality, I mean, they're very intense. And I would say that the poems become intense with that violence and that sort of trauma that she faces and all these things. It reminds me very much of Gloria Anzaldua's idea of the you know, how we sort of traverse through trauma through the psychic borders of our mind. And so much of this book feels like there's all these sort of psychic borders that these characters are crossing or facing, these sort of violations of their landscape and their minds. So it feels very necessary to have that spiritual practice to sort of process these many things, and this altar to sort of stay the faith throughout the book. I mean, because it can be really dark in certain moments. So I was just curious if you know you see that working in that way, or how you see that as a sort of counter to some of the more intense things that the book deals with. Because I could also see these beautiful, I don't know if anybody has the book, but like these beautiful illustrations between the books also seem to kind of function as these kind of like meditative or like stop and reflect kind of moments in the book. So I don't know if you want to speak more to that or like how you see that balance happening.
Yeah, well, first of all, shout out to Daniel Gonzalez, um, who is a print artist who did the cover. I came up with a sort of a conceptual sketch of what I wanted the cover to be, and he sort of like took it to the next level. So I'm like eternally grateful for him. But I don't know. I mean, what you were saying, I think, is like all about, for me, like transformation. And I don't know. I think like rituals, objects, like I feel like transformation needs an object. It helps. You need some kind of material to sort of like reflect on the immaterial, I think. I mean, just to like tell you my own personal experience with maintaining an altar, like I felt really silly at first. But I thought like I have to like sort of, I don't know, I think that was part of the creative practice. I mean, I started it a long time ago but I still remember it feeling a little bit silly, like what am I doing? But also sort of like going for it and thinking like, I remember a time when I kept an altar to Malverde and sort of in private, and was sort of like so when someone would come over to my place, like they wouldn't see it, you know. But then it got to the point where like everybody knows when they come over to my house that that's what they're gonna see, like, and I forget that it's around, and I feel like a lot of I think what you're talking about to me is like, just like transformation of like, of suffering, like enduring that and not, like, I don't know. I mean, I think there are a lot of traditions in indigenous cultures where, like a shaman will say like, accept some sort of suffering, say for like humiliation, in order to transform it. And I think that's like a really like, I don't know. I think that sort of has always struck a chord for me, because really early on in my creative practice, like I was always carried around that quote from, I think, Shakespeare's sonnet, maybe it's like 85. I don't know which one it is, but it's like, how with this rage shall, I'm totally misquoting it, but it's something like, how with this rage shall beauty make a plea whose action is no stronger than a flower. Sort of paraphrasing that, but it's like, how to take anger, how to take the suffering of the world, how to take trauma and turn it into something creative and redemptive. And I think that's like, I don't know, I don't want to shy away from that challenge, or from doing that, because I think, I don't know, I think that's part of being in a community and being responsible. And also, I don't know, I don't know, I think that seems just like the right way to live. But also I think that's sort of where the most, I think the brightest creative gems, if you will, you get those, I think, from really going deep. I mean, that's what I think, I think like, that's why I think like I also took Malverde as my own, because I felt like I wanted to like go into this dark terrain, because like we've all seen images from the drug war and they're really dark, and I sort of like delved into that for the better part of a decade, and to the point where I was just like, I didn't want to do it anymore, because just researching that was sort of like really gruesome and dark, and I felt like the violence had become senseless, like, life has sort of, the value of life sort of like lost meaning. So what do you do? What do you do with that? So I don't know, that's what I think of. I think that, like Alejandro Jodorowsky also, like I can't escape him. He also has, I think that's part of like the practice that he would call psychotherapy, finding some kind of correlation to some traumatic experience that you've had internally and then externalizing it some way in some kind of ritual, in a creative ritual. I mean, it doesn't have to be like a religious ritual. It can be something you create completely on your own, I think that there's something to that, you know, and I think like I'm really interested in that, and I think like the book sort of like tried to like harness that energy. I think it's, I don't know, should we stop there and take questions? I think, I don't know, like it's like about to be 45 after, like.
Yeah, I mean, Sebastian, do you have any other questions for Mike? If not, we can open it up for Q&A for sure.
Well, I'd like to request a poem before
Yep.
we get to that. Just one more. Could you read Everyday Tunnels?
Sure. Everyday tunnels. Explain the road held hostage by the three-legged waltz of a dog, twisting milk in his grin. Say it wasn't really a dog, but a man back for revenge and unable to lure his adversary out of his home. Say it wasn't really a road, but a dream our imaginations paved. That's why our slingshots veered left and we missed him every time. Explain the day we took supper for the 22 rifle, became host to the noiseless rabbits, how they arrived like thoughts into the grass we guarded, and came away with the bells of 3 bodies gripped in our hands. Headed to the pines for a stew on branch fire. The peppers abuelita grew in a wheelbarrow, the secret ingredient. A few spoons made us mummies trying to talk our bodies out of going blind. Back and forth, wiping our brows in an ecstatic hell of found time. Explain, but it won't be enough for the dice roll that told us which rooster to dub with the razor blade. How it took only a day to train it to blaze its head feathers at turkeys, even the ones that attacked Thea when she wore skirts. So many days are tunnels. At the end of one, nets of sunlit water for bathing outside. Another leads to a flea market where all our money put together affords only one pair of boxing gloves. So we flip a bottle cap to decide who gets to fight with his right hand.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to drop other questions, you can put them in the chat. But I guess I'll ask one question while people are thinking of that. So I guess I asked you to read that poem because I know you have tunnels that figure very heavily throughout the book. Yeah. And they seem to also speak to this sort of surrealness and the sort of subterranean of the mind, I guess you could say. You know, how you explore, you know, how you know, the landscape and like all these people there, you know, because of the world that they exist in, you know, everything seems kind of like ominous or suspicious. But there's also some kind of some surprises with how you write about the tunnels and like these other figures that recur, like the horse and the rider and you know, various vehicles that some of the characters use. So I'm just curious if you could kind of elaborate on like how you see these tunnels and maybe how, I guess I'm realizing that some of these, you know, recurring images also have to do with like sort of getting from one place to the other. So I'm wondering if that plays a role in like how these tunnels are thought of throughout the book, or if you want to elaborate on other ways that you've thought about that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think first, I think it was like a really, I don't know, I guess you could say fortuitous coincidence that, you know, like, so like in the film El Topo, you know, topos are like moles in English, and the metaphor is sort of that El Topo is sort of like digging underground, sort of through the subconscious, to sort of find, to surface and then sort of find some kind of enlightenment, however twisted that enlightenment may be. And I think, you know, like infamously El Chapo and tunnel digging became, you know, like one of the preferred methods for the drug trade for people in the criminal underworld. So I thought like I don't know, that was just like the perfect sort of parallel. But in terms of metaphors, I mean, I thought like, it became sort of like this sort of, I would say like surreal device, I thought like, that's just like a metaphor for anything, like a tunnel that connects this to that. I mean, I think like, I love just sort of thinking about that over and over and over. And I think I still have like endless pages of free writing where, I just sort of like riffed on a tunnel that connects, um, I don't know, Rilke to Rulfo, a tunnel that connects uh, Nas to Lorca, a tunnel that connects, anything, it's sort of like, and then to think about, well, what does connect that? So yeah, I mean, I think that continues. I sort of can't get away from that metaphor. I think it's also like a metaphor for the subconscious, which I think primarily is like, what I'm interested in terms of like poetry. I mean, I think specifically to me, like poetry is for that, like I think, I don't know, I'm kind of resistant to make like such a hard dichotomy, but I think sometimes I feel like, yeah, like prose tends towards the rational mind, the conscious mind, and poetry, which tends to break the conventions of syntax and linear sentences, tends to delve into the subconscious. And I think like that's why like I write poetry. Of course, some of the best prose does both. And sometimes poetry doesn't contain as much poetry as narrative does. So, it's flexible, but I mean, I think like that's why I think tunnels are so present. I think like the subconscious, what was already like a theme in that Alejandro Jodorowsky's film, and then sort of like that parallel with the criminal underworld. So yeah, that's.
Thank you. There is a question from the audience that was just messaged to me, but so in terms of research, what were some of the resources you used for your collection? So I know you talked about some research already, and I know you're basing a lot of the book on drug war and El Topo, but I'm curious if there's like other research that you did, or like field research or anything else that you'd like to mention.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I have a huge debt to Sam Quinones. True Tales of Another Mexico is an amazing book about the sort of unusual place that Mexico is, specifically along the border. He's an amazing journalist. And he was the first one to sort of like frame the narrative of Malverde, and sort of like, to me, like frame the narrative of like the rampant killing of women along the border, which is, something also that I sort of like touch on in the book. So, I mean, I think I sort of just was everywhere. I mean, I like anything that sort of was written on the drug war, from blogs to Twitter feeds, to like video. I researched and sort of like uh, try to get what I could from it. Like I think, I don't know, I felt like I had to cut it off at some point. I mean, the one book that I really wanted to read, that I didn't get to read before I wrote this book, was Bolaños 2666, which really takes I think that book is like fascinating, because I think Bolaño pre-internet had access to a criminal investigator along the border who was investigating like all these like homicides. But I mean, I also have to say like that before I even started making this about, the drug war in Mexico, I don't know, I spent like 5 years going to the indigenous regions of Michoacan. That's where my family's from. And I sort of came upon this knowledge that sort of in the backyard of the little town where my family is from are some of the more, I would say, colorful and true to pre-Hispanic rituals of the Day of the Dead that take place. And I sort of found that out, and I was like, wow, that's right. That's literally like a 15-minute drive where my family's from. And I was like, I have to go. And I felt like a lot of the imagery from the book is also taken from that, from seeing over a period of 5 years. I got lucky enough to sort of like make really good friends, you know, with a group of women who were wired into the Purépecha community in Michoacán. So every year I would just go, and we would go to different communities to see how they sort of celebrate the Day of the Dead. So I sort of got like a really up close look, I would say, at the more like pagan rituals of the Day of the Dead. You know, no iconography, no images, just really traditional. You know, like, and it's like two strains. You know, like the communities that sort of light up their cemeteries all night to mourn their loved ones in cemeteries. That's like, that was like amazing thing to sort of just like see with my own eyes. And also to go into these small towns, and, you know, like if you're mourning a loved one that year, you sort of line your doorway with marigolds. And that means that that family is mourning a loved one, and they've made an altar in their homes, and everybody's welcome to come see it, and also to, you know, enjoy like food and drink in there. So, you know, my friends would go, and I don't know, that also like fed into, you know, this practice of like altar making. And also at the Day of the Dead, I mean, I think one of the more extraordinary things that being in the like in the intimacy of one's home, and seeing literally like their really deeply personal art of, I mean, if you want to call it that, they're making this altar. There are rules to it, you know. You have the marigolds, you have tapers, you have food, you have the picture of a loved one, and it's like this cornucopia around this picture to remember a loved one. And I feel like it's just such a deep sense of remembering someone that's passed away, that I mean, I was just like, I mean, that's why I kept going every year, because I was so touched, you know. It was just like, I mean, I hesitate to call it art, but it's just like art. It's something that art doesn't do, you know. And I felt like, but it still is an art, you know. It's the deepest personal art that I've witnessed in my life, you know. And yeah, I was really touched by that. And that sort of, though that's the themes of the book are, you know, definitely try to sort of capture that sort of, I would say, ecstatic form of remembering. So yeah.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to Dario for that question. But yeah, just what you were saying reminds me of how that speaks maybe to the title about feeding the grave, maybe kind of like feeding the darkness, I guess, and making something of it. So this kind of what you were just saying speaks to me and connects to me with how I'm understanding the title, A Grave is Given Supper.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone else has other questions, or if you want to, I don't know, riff off of that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll just say like, yeah, that was, it's weird that sort of like that came, you know, our old mentor Tom Lux, I came up with that title in his workshop, and it was just sort of, it was just an exercise that I gave myself, like try to write a story in one sentence. And I wrote a sentence that's just like in the cemetery, a grave is given supper. I sort of just shortened that. But yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. I think that also became just an ongoing embedded metaphor for like writing this, like, you know, like what does that mean? And I think like the juxtaposition, I mean, I think that's also why I really wanted to see those indigenous forms of celebrating the Day of the Dead, because I really wanted to tap into that sort of, if I could, that sort of pre-Hispanic notion of the juxtaposition between life and death, you know, like And I think, I don't know, there's something to that. There's something really life affirming about, you know, like being on the edge of like that edge between life and death. I mean, I think it's, I don't know, like the Spanish were like shocked when they saw that. They thought it was like an inverse world, a hell, you know. But it's really not, you know. And I think like that duality is sort of like so present in you know, pre-Hispanic communities. So yeah, I try to tap into that.
Yeah, excellent. Well, it looks like I don't know if we have more time. We have 2 minutes left. I don't know if anyone wants to drop a question in, or if see, there's a comment from Stacy about you know, do you see this as a form of ritualistic, or a ritualistic form of art? She's especially interested in the powerful imagery used in the poems, going back to the trips you took to the indigenous village. Is there a connection between those visits and the artwork in the book? Or if you want to talk more about how the artwork came to be, like especially the ones that are between some of the sections?
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think I don't think I had this. I think what pleased me about the book, now that it, you know, it was turned into a stage adaptation, and I think like I do feel like the book is more of a communal object, and I would hope that this book is sort of like a communal object. And I think, well, that's one of the things that pleased me about it being staged, is sort of like Elena Hurst and Claudia Costa, who are my collaborators. I felt like they took real ownership of the book, and you know, took sort of the stage adaptation to the next level. You know, like I think Elena Hurst, the actor who played Consuelo and Topito in the play, I mean, she just took the words that I wrote to another level, where I felt like, yeah, they're hers now. You know, she owns these poems in a way that I could never. And in terms of the artwork, I mean, I think to me, like a lot of this has personal meaning to me. I mean, I think if you've been to a home in rural Michoacan, you're gonna see cups nailed to the wall. The Sacred Heart is really important to me as a symbol, and this sort of surreal image. I consider the two hummingbirds to be Topito and Consuelo. These are marigolds, which are, you know, like the path the dead walk to get back home, traditionally in celebrations of the Day of the Dead. And this is sort of a quarter moon, it's already a waxing gibbous, so it's about to be full. I mean, those are personal meanings, but also I think one could draw their own meaning from it. And, you know, like the illustrations in between were taken from a painting from Julio Galan called Tanje, Tanje, Tanje. And I sort of like thought about this because it was also a table, and behind it is an ocean. And I felt like I wanted to keep sort of a theme, but not be so prescriptive about it, with the grave is given supper, like a table, and the table where you make an altar became also a metaphor. So I wanted the book to be an art object, you know, and I also wanted an illustration. I think one of my favorite album covers is Blind Joe Death by John Fahey, like that blue and white cover. And I sort of wanted that feel for it. So I wanted, you know, the illustration to sort of evolve. Sort of like there's one object in the first part, in sort of like this wind that Daniel illustrated, and then there's another Sacred Heart that appears for the second section. The wall is here, Malverde appears. And, you know, like the different symbols sort of change. In one instance, with Malverde, a gun is present to sort of symbolize violence. In another instance, a pomegranate is present to sort of symbolize abundance. And in the end, I think I wanted the last illustration to be sort of this portal, implied portal right here, where there's nothing. And you just sort of like, there's sort of an empty doorway, sort of that we see in the first poem. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is, I wanted it to be sort of, it seems kind of subject to me, but I think also like, you know, anyone can draw their own meaning from it. And yeah, I don't know, I think, you know, shout out to like Deep Vellum and Will Evans, who, you know, like really allowed me to do that. You know, I think like he gave me liberty to sort of like make the book and, you know, fulfill the vision completely as I saw it. So that was really fortunate.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that thing about the communal object. I could see that resonating. I mean, especially with a book like this, it's very wonderful. There's a couple of questions left, but I'll kind of maybe combine them into one. But they're from Coleman and Alexandra. They're basically, I guess, about your future plans. Like, you know, do you plan on using you know, this ritual or spiritual practice for your next book? I know you're working on another book, and then the other question is related to will there be another theater adaptation of A Grave is Given Supper? But I know that you've kind of mentioned that you're doing like a screenplay version maybe. But so maybe just kind of just generally talk about future plans with your future projects and your future practices that maybe you'll carry with you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I'm working on a screenplay, like a real screenplay of the book. We're sort of on, like I would say our creative team is sort of on hiatus because I think Elena Hurst, she was in Twilight Los Angeles, 1992, which was like a Broadway adaptation here in New York, and you know, so she's busy with that. I mean, she's, you know, so I think we want to come back to it for sure. So the challenge is always like how to keep something like that going, you know. So I think we're due for a collaborative meeting. But yeah, I'm totally interested in sort of evolving it because I think, you know, like yeah, it's, I always thought of it as a book, but also something that someone could adapt, that I could adapt, that sort of someone could also like interpret on their own. And yeah, I mean, I think like in terms of like rituals and creative practice in the future, I mean, I think that will always be a part of my practice. You know, like I said, I think I went from maintaining an altar to sort of being sort of like shy about it to now it's just like part of what I do. And I think so the book that I'm working on incorporates photographs and poetry. So, and I'm working with my long-term collaborator, Diego Enrique Flores, and I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say where that will go right now. But you know, I'm sort of playing with sort of this idea of like a fictional witness to real things, you know, like if you have a photograph, the fact of a photograph remains no matter which way you twist it, you know, like a photograph is sort of an undeniable fact. But how do you incorporate that into a narrative of poetry? And I think, you know, like putting your interpretation into a sort of narrative, something that I think I'm sort of challenging myself to do. So that's like the next project, sort of like too green to sort of talk too more about. But I don't know. I mean, I'm really interested in hearing what other people think about, you know, that their practices of sort of incorporating ritual into a creative practice. You know, I think, where does that go? I think, you know, like, I guess we could say the pandemic is ending for now. We're sort of opening up. I'll be reading in public soon. And I've always been interested in what I would do with The Grave is Given Supper in public. Like, I would love to, I had sort of ideas to sort of to appropriate a space and build an altar and have a reading, you know, ideas like that. I mean, where like We did that in the first iteration of the stage adaptation. We encouraged people to add things to the altar we built to sort of mourn the people that they may have lost during the pandemic, or we just gave them flowers to place on the altar. I don't know. I mean, I think the communal aspect of art, I think, has never been more important. We're obsessed with authorship and credit and fame. And I think all those things are fine, but you can also include, how can you include more people, you know, in a more intimate way? How can you be co-creative with the audience? I think time is really right for that. I think, you know, we've been forced to be hermetic, and now we're sort of like, hopefully can take this new energy and smash old conventions. Instead of like coming back to the old ones, we can sort of, I don't know, create new spaces for meaning, because I think we need that. And the communal aspect, to me, I think, is one of the things that should definitely be in the conversation of like the evolution of any kind of art form.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's all the time we have left, but thank you to Gemini Inc. and Writing Workshops Dallas. Blake and Alexandra, y'all are amazing. And Mike, thank you for asking me to be involved, and thank you to everyone for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for doing it.
Yeah, thank you all for being here tonight. This was just a great discussion, and I love how cinematic your book is, Mike, from reading it and just everything you're doing with it, giving it the life, kind of going forward. And I just so appreciate all the things you talked about the nature of art and community, and just bringing those things to light tonight. So thank you all, for being here. Sebastian and Mike, thanks for such a great, thoughtful conversation about your work and everything else. So wishing you all the best. Thank you all for tuning in on a Wednesday night in March. And from Gemini Inc. to Writing Workshops Dallas and David Samuel Evanson, yeah, be good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. This was great. I'm a lot of food for thought. Then that's not meant to be a pun off your amazing title, Mike. But that's really, really interesting stuff. Yeah, thanks so much. I just loved listening into this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank y'all.
Thank you.